Okay, hi, welcome back. So second part of the assignment is looking at specialized cells, and remember that in the last section in 1.1 we looked at prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells, but we're looking at a generalized cell. This means that one of these cells doesn't exist. It's an amalgamation of all the structures saying these are the common features, and that's a generalized cell. In organisms like ourselves and plants, eukaryotic cells, we are, some of us are made of multicellular organisms, so humans, plants, but you do get microscopic plants like algae and microscopic animals such as protozoan. But as soon as you become a specialized cell, you have a particular role to fill out. Now we'll see in the second unit on human reproductive biology that as the fertilized ovum, known as a zygote, starts to grow and divide, first of all, it splits into 2 cells, then into 4, then in 8 and 16 and to 32. Now, up to that 16 to 32 stage, the cells haven't been given a particular role. Now, that's what we call our stem cells. And those stem cells can be changed into other cells. Now, what happens as we develop in our mother's womb is each of the cells starts to be given a particular role. And the ball of cells that I talked about starts to form a hollow sphere. And we'll get to these stages when we do the other unit. And then those cells will start to differentiate in that they were given a particular role. So, for example, your skin cell, that's its role, all right, to protect the outer part of your skin and be waterproof. However, your pancreatic cell has a particular role. Your liver cell has a particular role. And once that is set, that's it. Liver cells and pancreatic cells, they can turn into new pancreatic and liver cells. Same with skin cells. So if I cut myself, I could have here, there, you just see, okay, my body is trying to repair that cut. Okay, so the skin cells beside it start to knit together, okay, and form over, all right, the cut that I've got. Okay, but I don't want an ear, and I don't want an eye there. Well, an eye might be quite useful, but I don't want another type of organ there. Okay, so what happens is the skin cells are being given a particular way. When they divide and multiply, they will form new skin cells. Okay, so let's have a look at specialist cells. Now, what we mean is, how is their structure related now to their role? So structure, role. And what we're trying to do is say, well, this cell has been adapted to fulfill that particular function or its role. Sometimes we say role, sometimes we say the word function. In other words, what does it do? Now, the exam board recommend that you look at the red blood cell, known as erythrocytes, and the sperm cell, the human male gamete. But there are other cells, as I'll say. Now, there is a paper copy that I'm going to show on the screen that you should be able to kind of like access in my folder. So I'm going to put it up on the screen. Okay, so let's go to the top. So here is a red blood cell. As I say, it's also known as an erythrocyte. Notice that I've also got the reference, as we should in all of our images. Now, this is a classic shape of a mature red blood cell. Now, I say mature because remember, these are made in the bone marrow. And in the bone marrow, they will mature before they're released into the bloodstream. Okay. Now, just another couple of things that you might not be familiar with. Let's have a look at these measurements. 2 micrometers. Looks like a funny U. That has the actual Greek symbol mu, and it looks like a U with a little tail. If you want to insert such images and you haven't got the measurements and you want to put the measurements on, or you want to include them in your text, don't use the letter U, because it just looks UM, and that's wrong. It has to be the mu, the one with the tail. So what you would do is you would, I don't know if you can see on the top bar here of the specialist cells, there is an icon here. It's got symbols. If you look in there, you'll find the symbol for mu. Okay, so micrometers, otherwise you have to spell it out. Okay, so it's 2 millionths of a meter thick, okay, and 7.5 micrometers wide. So small cell, it actually has a dip. I always think of it as like a donut without the shape cut out or just squished in. Now that's very important, because if it was totally round, like a globe, all right, almost like a football, then its surface area wouldn't be as great as if it had a depression in. Okay. Now, increasing the surface area is extremely important. Now, this shape, because it's a curve going in on both sides, it's known as concave, but because it's twice, it's biconcave. So this is a flattened biconcave shape. And the reason why it's this shape, its structure, is so that it increases the surface area. Why is that important? By increasing the surface area, that means the respiratory gases of oxygen, which we collect from the lungs, binds to a special protein pigment, which we'll come to in a moment, and is carried to our cells. It's then released so that the cell can use the oxygen to convert our foods like glucose into energy so that we can stay alive. But in converting the glucose into energy, it produces a gas called carbon dioxide. Now that carbon dioxide, if it builds up in the body, can be poisonous. So the body needs to get rid of it quickly. So it gives it back at the same time as the oxygen's going out into the cell, it's taking in the carbon dioxide. So the carbon dioxide is returned by the red blood cell back to the lungs so it can be breathed out. So increasing that surface area is vital for its function. So here we've related the structure to its function in carrying the gases. And that's what we need to do. Now we can carry on with these adaptations, because when a red blood cell is mature, it has lost all of its organelles, including the nucleus. So there's no nucleus, there's no mitochondria, nothing's needed. Now, because of that, the red blood cell's life is limited to about 120 days, because they've got no nucleus controlling any chemical activity and no mitochondria to provide it with energy. Now, because there's no nucleus and because there is no mitochondria and other organelles, that means the cell can have in there more of this special protein pigment called hemoglobin. And at the center of the hemoglobin protein molecule, there is an iron atom, and that is what binds the oxygen or the carbon dioxide to the hemoglobin so it can be transported. And the gases move from high concentration to low concentration. So there's this steady flow of gases from our lungs into the blood, and similarly from the blood the carbon dioxide comes out through the lungs. So there we've got two adaptations. The biconcave shape increases the surface area to increase diffusion, and the lack of organelles means there's more space to pack in more hemoglobin so that we can carry more of the gases. Now, the final adaptation is that the biconcave shape and the fact that it contains a little bit more cholesterol in the phospholipid bilayer of our cell membrane means that the cell is much more flexible. Okay, because it's more flexible, it means that it can bend and squeeze through the very narrow capillaries where it's delivering the respiratory gases and nutrients and taking waste away, such as carbon dioxide, but also urea, etc., so that it can transport it around the body. So 3 adaptations there, right? Biconcave shape increases surface area, no organelles, increase in hemoglobin, and the fact that it's flexible allows it to go through the small capillaries. As an aside, those people that may be of African origin or in sub-Saharan continents around the world, etc. Sickle cell anemia is an unfortunate mutation of our cell's DNA, thinking that it was doing us a favor in producing a sickle cell, which is actually more resistant to malarial parasites, and therefore you don't have adverse effects from malaria as much. The downside is that it produces these sickle cells that are very rigid, and therefore they get trapped in the capillaries. So they've lost that functionality of flexibility, and the body's trying to write response to protect the body from malaria over evolutionary time. Because malaria is more prevalent along that belt of the equator, that's where we see sickle cell anemia. It's an unfortunate product of our body's ability to try and adapt and survive. In this case, it's a harmful adaptation. Not that you need to put that in your assignment, but it's a useful an aside piece of information and its application, right, to healthcare. Now, on the handout, you'll see notes for those. There's another section on neurons that I've put in. And remember that a neuron is a nerve or nerve cell, especially adapted to carry nerve impulses. Now, it's not like the electricity that's powering the lamps or this computer. It's a different form. And if you look at the structure, you can see that the axons and synapses and the dendrites, they are responsible for the transmission of our nerve impulse. Now, dendrites receive the impulses, and another neuron is then connected via a synapse, so that it can be passed on. So if you look at the diagram, here's the dendrites. They're collecting the information, usually from the sensors, comes through the cell body and then along the axon to these terminals here, which we call the synapse. Now, the cell's membrane is specially adapted because along the membrane there are two chemical ions. These are charged atoms, sodium, potassium. And what happens when we get a receptor that stimulates the end of the dendrites, they stimulate a change in these ions to swap over. Now, what happens is, as it swaps over, the next ion kind of like swaps over. So they're doing this all the way down our membrane. Now, think of what I'm doing with my hands, where they're swapping over from the outside to the inside. These ions swap over. So what happens is that the impulse travels along with these ions all the way to our brain. It actually goes through into our spinal cord and to our brain. So swapping of ions is a special adaptation structurally that occurs along the membrane of the dendrites and the axons. If you touch your finger, by touching your finger, your brain registers it within milliseconds. So you can imagine these ions swapping over is an extremely rapid process. Then the membrane has to shuffle the ions back into the original position. So as the ions are swapping over, going down the nerve, behind it, they're swapping back like this. So the sodium potassium change position. Now, along the outside, if you can see our diagram, there are Schwann cells. Now, it is a Schwann, all right? Can't remember if he was German or Austrian, and it's a capital letter. Again, it's a pronoun because it's a name. Okay, so these Schwann cells secrete a very fatty substance called the myelin sheath. And so what we have are the Schwann cells developing these fatty layer, which acts as an insulation, which improves the conductivity of the nerve impulse towards the spinal cord and brain. Now, there is a gap, very tiny little gap, called the node of Ranvier. And in this actual picture, they haven't spelled it with a capital letter, so I would remonstrate with the author of that, all right, because it is named after a person. At the axon terminals, there is a small gap called the synapse where it links to another neuron. That's so that the body can control the rate of impulses. So, for example, pain, and we can block the little gap, which we'll get onto when we do the nervous system, all right, just after Christmas probably. And it's a method of control. It also means that because it's connected to other neurons, if this nerve cell or those synapses were damaged, it can still get a pathway along to your spinal cord and brain. Because remember, a nerve is made up of millions of neurons or nerve cells. So that's a second specialist cell. The third one, which is this is the third one, or the second one that's recommended by the exam board, is the sperm cell. So, because it's so much more different than the red blood cell. So this is found in the male. Its streamlined shape already gives a key to what its role is, which is to swim towards the ovum once it's been delivered by the male organs, in our male case the penis, into the vagina, and then these swim up towards the ovum, and its role is to deliver this nucleus. Now, this nucleus has half the number of chromosomes, 23. It's called the haploid number instead of 46, because you need 23 from the male and 23 from the female. When they fuse together, you're back to your normal 46. And then those divide and produce cells 46, and we grow into the fabulous human beings we are. Okay. Now, it's delivering the nucleus, but how does it get there? Well, it has to swim. Well, if it's swimming, it needs energy. So packed away in this middle section here, behind the head of the sperm, is the mitochondria. Now, the mitochondrion spiral here is also kind of like got a supply of sugar. Now, that sugar has been delivered in the fluid in the semen. It's actually fructose, and that is used to power the tail, known as the flagellum, all right, of the sperm. So we're now trying to deliver the nucleus in the head of the sperm, and energy from the mitochondrion here powers the tail to hopefully get it to the ovum. But once it gets into the ovum, it has to penetrate inside the ovum. And there is a barrier around the ovum, as well as its cell membrane. There's a special membrane. And to help the sperm get through this particular outer layer, there is a protein cap along the head of the sperm. Now, that's called the acrosome, and that contains lysosomes containing digestive enzymes. Now, remember, lysosomes were structures, organelles within our generalized cell. They contain digestive enzymes. This does the cell. As soon as it gets there, it releases these enzyme, which digests the outer layer of the egg. The sperm can wriggle in. Once it's in, the nucleus then of the sperm joins with that of the ovum, and we have a fertilized egg. Okay, now the sugars can be glucose, but it's also fructose in the semen. Again, if you notice, I've put the reference for that image. You can find loads on the internet when you do the same. I've also, if you look, I've text wrapped it. Okay, when I click on it, I can text wrap it. That comes up. All right, with the text wrapping, I always choose the one over on the side here, which is tight. That means I can now, if I click off it, I can move it around so that my text flows around it. It's a skill that you'll need to do. So I can move this up. I can bring the size up so that way, okay, everything now looks like the flow. But if I think to myself, do you know what? I quite like to bring it down here, and then I'll just bring that up like that. And I've got me a neuron in the position that I want it to be. Okay, so that's text wrapping. Lastly, if you want to do your own research, I applaud you, because that will help in later assignments, because you've got to get used to research. So you could have a look at ciliated epithelium. Ciliated epithelium have these special structures called cilia, and they are found in the bronchial tubes of the lungs, and also in the female fallopian tubes, also known as oviducts. You could look at those. You could also look at the pancreatic cells of the crypts of Libacum, okay, which, and there are two types, the alpha, and I've given the symbol that you can see on the screen, and beta, again, the symbol there on the screen. They can be found in the symbols page at the top. So if you want alpha and beta, you can find those. And you can see that the alpha cells secrete a specialized hormone called glucagon that raises our blood sugar levels from the liver when we haven't got enough glucose in the blood, and the beta cells produce the more classic insulin, which lowers our blood sugar levels, okay, by stimulating its uptake into our cells and liver cells. Entirely up to you which ones you do. We recommend the red blood cell and the sperm cell because it's fairly straightforward. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing there, come back to the full screen. Okay, that's the second video, so that's 1.2, looking at specialized cells relating to specialist cells. And separately, you look at the, for example, the structure of the red blood cell, the erythrocyte, and relate it to how it's adapted to its function. So structure, how is that adaptation related to its function? Similarly, the sperm, how is that structure related to its adaptation to perform its function as a male gamete? Okay, all right, that's 1.2. I'll now have a look at giving you the video link for the cell membrane, because I did this back in September. So we'll also provide the video link for the cell membrane as well. Okay, bye.